Hello and welcome to the world's longest suicide note. This is not chapter 1. This is the preface or preface, depending on how you say it, but it's the part before you start chapter 1 that kind of sets the stage for what's to come. And so, yes, as I said, this is going to be a series of videos called The World's Longest Suicide Note. And the question is, why is that? And the answer is simply that I'm suicidal. And so to lay the groundwork for why I'm doing what I'm doing, that's what this is for. This video is for. So I'm going to say a few things, and then I'm going to lay the groundwork and the rules that I'm going to follow, so to speak, for the rest of this series. Let's start at the beginning. And I'm going to be painting while I do this because that's what I do. I mean, I love to paint, and painting is one of the therapies that I use all the time. One of the biggest tools in my toolbox. I'm not an artist, don't claim to be. I know a lot of artists and they're like really good at doing what they do. I don't care to be an artist, so to speak. I love creativity, and honestly, creativity has saved my life on more than one occasions. So, I like being creative. I think there's huge value in that, but it's not something that I consider, something that I'm proficient in or in any way, good at. I value the process for myself. So anyway, let's get back to the suicide thing. And just, hang out while I put some paint on a canvas. And I'll talk about this image deal that I'm working on as we get going. So, because that's going to be something too that will be a thing at some point. So anyway, yes, this is my 44th year of living with mental illness. So 43 years ago, the summer of my 13th year, so if you do the math, you realize I'm old. And so that being said, and I don't know really what I'm doing. I mean, anyway, I'm going to go back and forth. So sorry if as I go through this, I'm going to try to maintain rational thought. But for me, that's not always easy. So anyway, so I may bounce around a bit, but that's what I do. Anyway, so when I was 13, the summer of my 13th year, I started seeing things. They were dark things, and they made me feel really bad. And so, but I never told anybody about it because at the time, my family was going through kind of a rough patch with an uncle who was dealing with bipolar manic, and he was a he was a Vietnam veteran who would spend his time between our house and the VA hospital. And he'd go and he would get, all hooked up with some medications and a dosage that worked out for him, and he'd be the greatest uncle in the world for a couple weeks after he got back from the VA. But it never really lasted because at some point he'd be feeling good and would just decide, I don't need no stinking medications. I'm perfect just the way I am. Which, I mean, I agree that people are perfect the way they are, but sometimes you need a little medication. or sometimes you need a little therapy, and that's not a bad thing. Anyway, but at the time, my parents and my family in general were having a fairly hard time with Jack and dealing with him. And then here I come with now I'm starting to see things, and it scared me to death. I mean, obviously, when you see things, dark entities in your eyes and your mind, it's a shock. But that coupled with seeing what else was going on in the house, I made the choice to do nothing, or not really do nothing, but to say nothing. There was a couple reasons why. I didn't want to add to my parents' burden of dealing with this stuff. And I also was terrified that I was going to be Jack. This was the first steps in turning into Jack. And so it's like, if I don't say anything, nothing bad could happen. I mean, what's the worst that could happen if you don't say anything? And the answer is a lot. Really bad stuff could happen if you don't talk about it. But I was 13. I didn't know better. And so I just went on with my life. I definitely was feeling it, but I was able to hide it. And really one of the reasons is because early on I had to come up with some tools, because if I'm going to go this alone, I'm going to have to figure this thing out. And one day I was just sitting down doodling, killing some time, and I realized that it made me feel better. It made what was going on in my head more manageable, and so I started doing it more. I've never really been trained, never taken classes on how to do this, and I'm not fixing to teach anyone else because if you want to learn how to paint or do anything, there's 1,000 videos out there that teach you how to paint. You can paint happy trees and all kinds of things, and I encourage it 100%. But this is not a painting tutorial, so to speak. I'm just going to sit here and talk and paint. So when I was 17 or 18, it's fuzzy now that I'm old, I couldn't hide it anymore. It came out that I was struggling myself, and then I went and my parents took me to get some actual help, which was its own problem that for another day. But that was the first foray into actual kind of organized mental health exposure. So anyway, but life went on, and so did my mental illness. Most of this is going to be about the suicide part of it. So I'm going to fast forward to when I was around, let's see, how old was I? 27. It's been about 25 years. Anyway, I was in my late 20s. Again, still dealing with this. But then the suicide ideations started at that point. And soon followed by actual planning my suicide, and which I will say, I've never planned anything in my life like my suicide. My suicide was very detailed, planned out. I mean, every single angle was planned out. I mean, where I was going to be found. I mean, the angle of the gun. And I did a ton of research on it, and it was kind of like, I mean, in a sick way, it was kind of the therapy, I mean, that I needed at that time, was planning my own death. And I did, we get into like a thing now where it's like, okay, I didn't kill myself, obviously. But then I felt bad about it, like, gosh, you can't even kill yourself, which is part of the deal, which is part of the sickness that we have. And, no one's talked about suicide, and so I don't really have a frame of reference. There's been suicides in my family, but it was never ever talked about, ever, in any level. But yes, I 25 years ago, I really tried to take my life, and the part that really is the hardest, I think, is once you get to that point and you don't do it, you're not successful, and really in our society, that's a failure, and so you have to deal with, oh, I'm still here, that's a failure, and now I got to deal with that failure piece of it. Anyway, but I didn't do it. I tried multiple times. But again, no one's saying what happens when you're not successful. What happens then? Your life just moves on, and you never think about it again. You never go back there again. And what I tell people is this: the first time you go to the edge of the abyss and you stare in, and if you come away from that, there's no real repercussions, so to speak. It doesn't follow you as much, but the third time you go there and you stand on the edge, what is it that Nietzsche said? Sometimes you look into the abyss and the abyss looks right back into you. I butchered that, but he's dead, so anyway. But after a while, it starts to call to you. And I always say that I believe that it's like the sailors that got caught in the doldrums and went mad and ended up jumping overboard and swimming and drowning. And at the time, they would say, oh, they heard the siren song. I really do feel like they just were suicidal for a period of time. And every time they would get close, it would call to them. And it does, and it calls to me. And so I think about suicide a lot. And it's part of my life now. And even though this has been going on for 25 years, I've only opened up about the constant suicide ideation in the last year, maybe year and a half. Again, time. I mean, it might have been 5 years. I don't know, but it's been a little bit. So why now? I guess. So I've been suicidal for 25 years, and I think that the reason why now I'm doing this. Now I'm, coming out and talking about this, is that I've noticed in the last few months that my mental health has gotten worse, and that's a concern. And so, I used to say, "Oh, I'll never kill myself." I can't promise that. I mean, I where I'm at, I can't. I love, and the big irony, and I don't think you'd laugh at this, but I'd probably laugh at it, is that I have a great life. I have an amazing family, a beautiful wife, 3 kids. We'll talk about the kids later because there's issues there. Anyway. But I get a lot of satisfaction out of my life. I just don't want to be living anymore. And I get it. I totally get the confusion. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and I am who I am. And so I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about what's going on, and I'm going to every video will be a different chapter. Like I say, this is the preface. I want to keep saying preface. I think it's pronounced preface. This is just letting you know why I'm doing this. And we're gonna and so I'm just gonna talk and paint, and what we talk about is primarily going to be severe mental illness and suicide. But hopefully what'll happen from this is that I get through this time and able to move on and maybe not kill myself. Anyway, more to come. That's just an idea, but the rest will we got some time to spend together. So yeah, we'll see you next time in chapter 1.